This is the machine that Russian gunners have learned to hate, but rarely manage actually to kill. It's a wheeled predator gifted to Ukraine by Poland. It's dangerous, built for speed, and hard to put down. But it's not without its struggles. Today, we're going to walk through exactly what it is, how many of them are already in Ukrainian hands, and where this partnership between Warsaw and Kyiv is heading next. The vehicle in question is the KTO Rosomak, and the name actually fits. Rosomak means Wolverine in Polish, and like the animal, this thing is smaller than other apex predators on the battlefield, but built to be tough, fast, and virtually unstoppable. In a more technical sense, the Rosomak is an 8x8 wheeled armored personnel carrier, derived from the Finnish Patria AMV, but the design work actually goes back further than most people realize. Poland formulated its original requirements for a new wheeled transporter back in the mid-1990s, finalized them in 1999, and by 2004 the first pre-series vehicles were rolling off the line, featuring a narrowed hull and enlarged propellers compared to the original Finnish prototypes. The first two production vehicles for the Polish army arrived in Gdynia in May of that year, were fitted with their turrets, and received their official name at a ceremony that June. Since then, Poland has ordered well over 1,000 of these vehicles across 16 different configurations, everything from standard troop carriers to command posts to the RAK self-propelled mortar system, which we'll mention again shortly. It first saw combat with Polish troops in Afghanistan, where one took a direct RPG hit to the frontal armor and the round failed to penetrate. But that wasn't a one-off. Polish Rosomaks absorbed multiple attacks in Afghanistan over the following years, and while the vehicle wasn't invulnerable, that early combat record helped convince the Polish military the design was sound enough to keep investing in. That combat pedigree matters because everything Ukrainian troops are now experiencing with it in the Donbass and around Kharkiv builds directly on lessons the Poles already paid for in blood a decade and a half ago. Let's start with the number that gives this episode its title. On paper, the Rosomak's top road speed is listed at 100 km per hour, a figure that shows up consistently across Polish and Ukrainian sources. That number alone should already put it in a different category than most tracked vehicles on this battlefield, since nothing runs on treads that can touch that space on a paved road. But there's also something interesting straight from the crew operating one of these vehicles with the 44th Separate Mechanized Brigade. The gunner told us he thought the vehicle could hit something closer to 120 km per hour. While we couldn't verify that figure against any official specification sheet, we're treating it as a soldier's seat of the pants impression rather than a confirmed number. But whether it's 100 or 120, we're talking about a wheeled combat vehicle that can outrun almost anything else on this front. And that speed is precisely why Russian gunners struggle to keep a lock on it before it's already gone. Weight-wise, we're looking at about 22 tons in the base configuration, which goes up to 25 or 26 tons depending on the armor package bolted on. That's powered by a diesel engine putting out somewhere around 480 to 490 horsepower, giving it enough torque to haul that weight up steep inclines and through rough terrain without losing the responsiveness Ukrainian crews keep praising. One driver we spoke with, who used to operate a next-gen T8 Holland tractor back in civilian life, told us the transition surprised him. He'd never served before, never touched an IFV, and yet he said the automatic transmission felt familiar enough that the biggest adjustment was solely with the sheer size of the vehicle and the blind spot on the right side. That might be a small detail, but it said something meaningful about how this platform is designed. It's forgiving enough that troops with no prior armor experience can be brought up to a working level of competence in a matter of weeks rather than months. Range is another strong point. Depending on the source, we're seeing figures between 700 and 800 kilometers on a single tank of gas, which gives Ukrainian units the ability to reposition across long stretches of front without constantly worrying about refueling logistics. Combined with the extreme road speed, this is a vehicle built to go fast, hit hard, and relocate again before counter-battery fire or a drone operator can get a fix on it. Now let's talk about how the vehicle actually deals damage. The most common turret fitted to Ukrainian Rosomaks is the Italian-designed Hitfist 30P, a two-man turret built around a 30mm automatic cannon that Ukrainian crews describe as fast, accurate, and intimidating. A report directly from a gunner suggested it can put out 200 rounds a minute, and that inside the turret it's almost deceptively quiet. Outside, he said, it's a different story entirely. The cannon can fire programmable airburst ammunition, which is particularly effective against infantry in the open, light vehicles, and even low-flying helicopters, and it's backed up by a 7.62mm machine gun for close, fast-moving threats. But there's another interesting addition that doesn't make it to most spreadsheets. The turret feeds ammunition through two separate paths rather than one shared belt. That means the crew can load high-explosive rounds on one side and armor-piercing rounds on the other, and switch between them instantly depending on what target shows up. No waiting for a belt to cycle through, no fumbling to reload mid-engagement. If a Russian squad appears in the open, they hit them with high explosives. If a lightly armored vehicle rolls into view seconds later, they flip to armor-piercing. That kind of flexibility is exactly the sort of thing that turns an ambush into a one-sided engagement. It's also worth noting that this Hitfist 30p turret isn't the newest option for the platform. Poland has already developed its own unmanned turret called the ZSSW-30, which removes the crew from the turret entirely and relocates them fully inside the armored hull. This will dramatically improve survivability and let the cannon be serviced without anyone exposing themselves above the vehicle. That turret pairs the same 30mm cannon with Spike LR anti-tank guided missiles, and it's engineered so that if a drone or fragment sets off one of those missiles, the blast is directed outward rather than into the crew compartment. Poland has already signed contracts to fit dozens of standard Rosomaks and almost 100 of the newer Rosomak L variants with this turret. While none of that hardware has shown up in Ukraine yet, at least as far as we can confirm, it's a clear signal where this whole vehicle family is heading, and it wouldn't be surprising to eventually see that same unmanned turret technology find its way east. Protection-wise, the Rosomak isn't trying to be a tank, but that doesn't mean it's completely helpless. The frontal armor is designed to stop 14.5mm heavy machine gun rounds, and the sides are rated against 7.62mm rifle fire. Some configurations add a heavier outer armored package that significantly improves protection against threats like rocket-propelled grenades and improvised explosive devices. Those upgraded kits were originally developed for the vehicles Poland deployed to Afghanistan in the 2000s. The vehicle should also be able to survive a 6-kilogram high-explosive blast underneath the hull, which matters enormously given how much of this war is now being fought with mines and improvised explosives buried in the road. This is, however, where some downsides show up. The open-source tracking project, Oryx, has documented several confirmed losses of Ukrainian Rosomaks over the course of this war, and Wikipedia's own tally cites at least 6 destroyed and 1 damaged as of recent counts. So while this is clearly not a miracle vehicle, and nobody fighting in it treats it as invulnerable, what stands out in nearly every account we found, both from crews and from open-source reporting, is how many of these vehicles survive hits that would have been fatal for something less protected. One crew told us they'd been targeted by Russian Lancet drones repeatedly, sometimes even while parked in a holding position well behind the front, and that these vehicles have taken damage and kept surviving. Crews walked away, the machines went back to a repair depot, and then they returned to service. That survivability, more than any single spec on paper, may be the single biggest reason Ukrainian units keep asking for more of these. But if there's one weakness that's worth considering, it's mud. Crews have suggested that it performs poorly in deep mud unless they lower the tire pressure using the vehicle's central tire inflation system to improve traction. However, if the tires are damaged and the vehicle has to rely on its run-flat inserts, it can only travel around 20 kilometers before repairs become necessary. That means commanders still have to think carefully about routes and recovery options, which can become a significant tactical constraint in a war fought heavily across open fields and river floodplains. Then there's the supposed amphibious capability, which lets the Rosomak swim across water obstacles at around 10 km per hour using rear-mounted propellers and folding bow vanes. It sounds impressive on paper, but Ukrainian crews seem to actually advise against using it in combat conditions, and as far as we can tell, Ukrainian forces haven't used that swimming capability operationally in this war at all. By every account, the vehicle should settle into the water up to a marked waterline and float well, but the practical risk of ending up in a river under fire seems to outweigh the benefit. There's also a training curve that's easy to overlook. One crew member told us that simply learning to operate the rear troop doors properly, aligning the locks, undoing the catches in the right order, took several days of dedicated practice before it became second nature, and that only after groundwork was the crew moved on to actually learning the turret systems. If the crew doors jam or get damaged, there are backup roof hatches the 8 dismounted troops in the back can climb out through, which is a smart design redundancy, but it underlines that this is still a complex piece of machinery that takes real time to master, even for troops motivated to learn it fast. Remember that civilian from before who suggested that the controls felt familiar? What doesn't feel familiar is the sheer bulk of the hull and the huge blind spots these vehicles can have. In some cases, this can only be overcome with repeated obstacle course runs and parallel parking drills. It's a small window into just how much of this war is being fought by people who were driving tractors and delivery trucks 2 or 3 years ago, thrown behind the controls of NATO standard armor and expected to become proficient fast. But before we get into how the vehicles are being used, make sure to subscribe to the Military Show to get more updates on all things geopolitics. We post daily videos that cover specs, tactics, daily events, and deep analytics of what exactly is going on in the war. Now, on the tactical side, rather than leading frontal assaults, Ukrainian Rosomak crews are seemingly used for standoff strikes and fast ambushes. They receive target coordinates, move into position, unleash that 200 rounds a minute cannon on infantry positions or fortified buildings, and then pull out before Russian artillery or drones can respond. One crew described closing to around 400 meters near Vovchansk to help clear a river bridgehead so Ukrainian infantry could cross, and another engagement where they came within about 150 meters of a 2-story building housing dug-in Russian troops, tearing the structure apart to cover a Ukrainian withdrawal. Beyond direct combat, these vehicles have also been used to support army engineers building river crossings at night by transporting personnel and equipment, and to evacuate wounded soldiers under fire, which speaks to how versatile the platform is once it's actually in theatre. Now, there's a question of how many of these are actually in Ukraine to serve that tactical role. Poland's government announced back in April 2023 that it would supply 200 KTO Rosomaks to Ukraine, and that figure of 200 delivered shows up consistently to suggest that there's at least that many around. Ukraine's 21st Mechanized Brigade was reportedly the first unit to start receiving these vehicles back in the summer of 2023, and the 44th Separate Mechanized Brigade, the unit that was interviewed for one outlet, is now operating them as well, which tells us there's a real fleet spread across multiple Ukrainian formations. So where does this partnership go from here? This is where things get genuinely interesting, because Poland and Ukraine aren't just staying in a straightforward donor-recipient relationship anymore. Instead, they're moving toward actually building weapons together. In February 2026, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky signed a letter of intent in Kyiv committing both countries to joint production of weapons and ammunition at facilities in both Poland and Ukraine, with an early focus on drones. Tusk described it as the culmination of many months of work to remove the barriers that had been slowing down technology transfer between the two countries, and both sides framed it as something backed by concrete follow-up rather than just symbolic language. And we're already seeing that translate into specific programs. Ukraine's own Bodana self-propelled 155mm howitzer, one of the country's genuine homegrown artillery success stories, is set to be produced in Poland through a joint venture between the Polish company Pona Wadowice and Ukraine's Kramatorsk heavy machine tool building plant, with a Polish partner holding a controlling 51% stake. The plan is to mount that Ukrainian artillery system onto chassis tailored to Poland's requirements, allowing Warsaw to replace its aging Czechoslovak-designed Dana howitzers while giving Ukraine its first genuine foreign customer for a domestically designed weapon system. That's an important shift because it means battlefield-tested Ukrainian engineering is starting to flow back into a NATO country's own arsenal, not just the other way around. This sits inside a broader Polish-Ukrainian framework called Build with Ukraine, launched back in mid-2025, which is specifically designed around joint ventures where Ukraine supplies frontline expertise, particularly around drones, interceptor systems, and electronic warfare, while European partners like Poland bring capital, factory space, and the certifications needed to sell into EU markets. Under that model, Ukrainian firms get a foothold in European markets they'd otherwise struggle to enter, while Poland gets access to combat-proven engineering that took 3 years of full-scale war to develop, without having to run those same battlefield trials itself. Progress on some of the specific intergovernmental agreements has reportedly been slower than hoped. Poland and Ukraine's defense ministers only signed their broader declaration on strengthening the relationship back in September 2025, but the direction of travel is unmistakable and it's backed by real money. Poland is the single largest recipient of the European Union's new Safe Defense Loan program, and a notable portion of that funding is explicitly earmarked to support joint projects with Ukraine, alongside drone and counter-drone technology, artificial intelligence, and long-range precision munitions. Ukraine, for its part, is also counting on Poland's continued participation in the Pearl program, which channels Western-funded weapons purchases through NATO to Ukraine and remains central to keeping Ukrainian air defense stocked. Which brings us to the bigger picture sitting behind all of this. Poland isn't just arming Ukraine because it's a good neighbor. It's simultaneously building what its own leadership openly says they want to become the largest and best-equipped military force in Europe. Poland's defense spending for 2026 is set at roughly 4.8% of GDP, the highest ratio of any NATO member by a wide margin, translating into around $55 billion dedicated to defense in a single year. That's already the largest share of GDP any NATO country is spending on its military, ahead of the Baltic states, ahead of the United States, and well ahead of Germany, France, or the UK. Prime Minister Tusk posted that Poland will have the largest army, the greatest economic growth, and the biggest investment of any country in the region, and its defense minister, Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz, has said outright that the goal is for Poland to field the best organized and best equipped military on the continent. That spending isn't only going toward hardware sitting in warehouses either. Poland is simultaneously reworking how many people actually serve. The government has been sending out hundreds of thousands of medical commission notices to men of conscription age, along with women and citizens over 50, registering them into the military system even if they're not immediately called up. This is bolstered by a survey that found that Poles are increasingly pro-conscription in the first place. In 2022, polls showed only 35.7% of people in support of re-establishing mandatory military service for men, while the 2026 poll reported that roughly 52% of respondents were supportive of military service, with 31% strongly supporting it. At the same time, Poland is investing in its own industrial independence in ways that go well beyond just buying foreign hardware. The Polish Armaments Group recently signed a deal to build a domestic facility capable of overhauling the gas turbine engines that power America's Abrams tanks, meaning Poland will become the only country in Europe able to service those engines without needing to ship them back to the United States. Poland has also put its own reconnaissance satellites into orbit and is pushing forward with its first nuclear power plant, aiming for construction to begin in 2028. On the funding side, Poland just became the first country to actually sign its loan agreement under the EU's new Safe Defense program, receiving close to 44 billion euros, approximately $45 billion, by far the largest allocation of any member state, ahead of Romania, France, and Italy. Roughly 2/3 of the equipment bought with that money is required to come from EU, European Economic Area, or Ukrainian suppliers, and Polish officials have been explicit that a significant slice of it will flow directly into joint programs with Ukraine, on top of investments in drones, counter-drone systems, artificial intelligence, and long-range precision munitions. Now, getting there wasn't entirely smooth. Poland's president initially vetoed part of the funding mechanism over sovereignty concerns, and Warsaw had to restructure how the money moved as a result, which is a reminder that even inside a country moving this aggressively on defense, the politics of how to pay for it all remain genuinely contested. Combine that domestic spending surge with the Safe Loan program, ongoing purchases of F-35 fighters, Abrams tanks, and South Korean-made systems that Poland has increasingly turned to for faster delivery timelines than Western suppliers can offer, and a rapidly scaling domestic arms industry that's now co-producing weapons with Ukraine itself. And what we're watching take shape isn't just support for Kyiv, it's the emergence of a genuinely serious military power on NATO's eastern flank, one whose own rearmament and its support for Ukraine have become two sides of the same project. At this point, as much as this is about Ukraine, it's really worth underscoring Poland's whole trajectory right now, because Poland itself is one of the likely targets if Putin decides to set its sights on NATO and the West. And to learn more on how that war might turn out, check out this video. And as always, make sure to subscribe to the Military Show for daily news.